Act 1, The Setup. The village of Ravenglen was wrapped in an eerie silence, its cobblestone streets lined with buildings that seemed to lean inward, as if whispering among themselves. The late afternoon sun hung low, casting elongated shadows that stretched unnaturally along the road. Elena Markov pulled her coat tighter against the crisp autumn air. She had traveled to many places chasing stories, government corruption, corporate scandals, even a few supposed hauntings. But there was something about this village that made her uneasy. It wasn't just the folklore, it was the way the people here looked at her, as if she had already been marked. James, her ever-skeptical cameraman, walked beside her, rolling his eyes. This place is straight out of a horror movie. Small town? Check. Creepy fog? Check. And let me guess, local legends? Before Elena could reply, a woman darted out from a narrow alley. Her blonde hair was tangled, and her wide eyes brimmed with desperation. "You shouldn't be here," she whispered. "Leave before nightfall." Elena tried to question her, but the woman, Lena, according to the villagers, backed away, shaking her head. "The hollow veil is opening. It takes those who stay too long." Then she disappeared into the mist as quickly as she had appeared. Elena glanced at James, who scoffed. Classic small-town superstition. They continued toward the village library, where Marcus, the local historian, waited. He was a gaunt man in his 50s, his gaze heavy with secrets. He barely greeted them before pulling a dusty book from the shelves and flipping through brittle pages. "You want to know about the disappearances?" he asked. "They all have one thing in common, the mirror." Elena frowned. "The hollow veil?" Marcus hesitated, then nodded. "It's not just a story. Once a year, the boundary between the living and the dead weakens. And those who stare too long," his voice trailed off, as if speaking more would invite something unwanted. That night, Elena and James found themselves drawn to an abandoned church on the outskirts of town. The walls were cracked, the wooden pews coated in thick dust. But it was the altar that caught their attention. Behind it stood a massive, ornate mirror, its surface clouded with grime. James ran a hand over the glass, wiping away centuries of dust. As his reflection emerged, he let out a slow breath. Then he stiffened. "Did you see that?" Elena looked up. "See what?" James pointed at his reflection. It moved, but not with me." Elena narrowed her eyes. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but he was right. His reflection twitched, just a fraction of a second off. And then, deep in the mirror's surface, a shadow moved. Not his shadow, something else. A whisper curled through the air. They bolted. Act 2, The Descent into Horror. The first night, James dismissed the experience as a trick of the light. But by the following evening, he was no longer so sure. "I swear to God, Elena, I keep hearing something," he muttered as they reviewed their footage. "Like someone whispering my name." The camera picked up nothing but static and faint distortions. But Elena noticed something else. There were figures in the background that hadn't been there when she filmed. Then, the disappearances began. Lena was the first. Elena went to her home the next morning, only to find the door ajar, the interior in complete disarray. No sign of Lena, except for a single mirror left standing in her bedroom. When Elena approached it, she felt her breath catch. Lena's reflection was still there. Moving. Pleading silently. The rules of the hollow veil began to unravel before them. Marcus, reluctantly, explained the truth: the veil is not just a legend. It's a boundary. The dead can reach through, and if you look too long, they take your place. James laughed uneasily, but his hands trembled. That night, Elena found him staring at his own reflection for far too long. By dawn, he was gone. Only his reflection remained in the church mirror, banging against the glass, screaming soundlessly. Panic set in. Elena smashed the mirror, desperate to break the curse. But when she turned to Marcus, his face drained of color. "Elena," he whispered. "Where's your reflection?" She turned slowly to the cracked remains of the mirror. There was nothing. Just an empty frame. She was fading. Act 3, the final confrontation. The villagers fled as the hollow veil consumed the town. Elena, locked inside the church, felt her body growing translucent, her voice weakening into echoes. She was slipping away, becoming one of the lost souls. Marcus, overcome with guilt, confessed the last secret. "It doesn't just take you, it replaces you. Everyone who disappears is reborn as a shadow, luring others in." Elena refused to succumb. She scavenged through the ruins of the church, piecing together a desperate plan. The stained glass windows, fragments of holy light, might be enough to weaken the entity. As the veil fully opened, a monstrous version of herself stepped through. Her doppelganger, hollow-eyed and grinning, moved in eerie synchrony. Elena fought. Every shard of glass she shattered weakened the entity, forcing it back. Her reflection, warped and grotesque, clawed at her, but with one final, desperate strike, she shattered the last mirror. The hollow veil screamed as the village was engulfed in a blinding light. Then, silence. Elena awoke, alone. The village was empty. The church lay in ruins. Ending variations. Bleak ending. Days later, a traveler finds a shard of glass. Inside it, Elena's reflection is trapped, screaming soundlessly. Ambiguous ending. Back in her hotel room, Elena sighs in relief, until she looks in the mirror. Her reflection lags, smiling just a second too late. Survivor ending. She escapes, but as she walks through the city, reflections in shop windows turn to watch her, whispering her name. Tagline: some reflections should never be seen.